Welcome back to HFO Multifamily Market Watch, your trusted source for information for apartment owners and investors. Multifamily Market Watch is presented by Pacific Exteriors Northwest, a contractor specializing in siding and exterior envelopes and delivering exceptional quality and service for over 30 years. And by Gantry Incorporated, the nation's largest independent mortgage banking firm.
Welcome back to Multifamily Market Watch. I'm Greg Frick, partner at HFO Investment Real Estate. Today, we're lucky to have back with us Andrea Bell. She is the Director of Oregon Housing and Community Services Department. Thank you for coming back. It's been a couple years since we had you on.
Of course. It's good to be with you.
For people that don't know, give us a quick overview of Oregon Housing and Community Services and what they do, what their role is within the state, and then we'll kind of talk about 2025 and 26.
Yeah, so Oregon Housing and Community Services is the state of Oregon's housing agency. And so in the most sort of straightforward way, our job is to advance housing progress that makes everyday life a little bit more better and affordable for people across the state of Oregon.
Okay.
As you know, housing supply and housing affordability is one of the issues that is going to shape our state's future. And so from rental production to home ownership to helping to make sure that people can stay in their homes, it is the role of our agency to really convene and work with a lot of funders and partners to make sure that we are making good on the promises that people really need for their lives.
And so are you partnering with, I think people in wherever they live, they're familiar with, Prosper Portland or, Service. So how does that interwork? Is it you oversee those agencies, you are working together hand in hand with them?
Yeah, so as the state's housing finance agency, we are primarily a funder.
Okay.
And so the primary ways that we make housing progress possible is one, through resources, which is one of the things that people generally know us for, but then also through policy. So think about rules of the road. So the primary ways in which people see plots of dirt, and then that plot of dirt becomes a place where people call home, is we make resources, all types of resources available to for-profit developers, nonprofit developers, community-based organizations. It's really those folks on the ground that understand the needs, that drive proposals for different housing projects. And then our job is to make sure that there is a solid understanding of what the need is and to make sure that the resources sort of match those projects across the state.
So an advocate for, like you said, nonprofits, public.
That's right.
Private owned, the whole spectrum of housing.
That's right. And I think more broadly than that, I think one of the kind of abstract parts of the job as well is to make sure that as a state, we have a clear vision for where we are going from a housing perspective. It is important that as we think about just everyday lives, people that get up and they're really worried about rents and mortgage, if they have kids, they're worried about what that means for them. But also, I think just everyday life and community life, whether you're in the metro region or whether you're in small towns and rural communities, lack of housing and affordability is impacting people. And so the state has to be able to execute a vision and then make sure that that vision continues forward in a way that's actually visible in people's lives across Oregon.
And then I know when we sat down last time, I think it was right before or right after the budget request. I think it was in 23.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, there was goals set on that. How did that process work? And are you expecting the same thing coming in the next session, or has things changed since then?
Yeah, well, I think the last time that you and I talked, it was right amid or right post sort of the height of the pandemic.
Yes, it was.
And what was consuming conversation in our state, but also across the nation, was literal life and death through the pandemic. We were swimming in federal resources to help keep people in their home, but also to help small and large landlords to keep things going for folks. But also what was dominating conversation at that time was cost of living and inflation. And even though the pandemic is a little bit behind us, some of those same concerns lie today. So if we go back to just how we get resources from a state perspective, about a year before the session even convenes, we are building out the budget. And so that involves a lot of work and a lot of conversations to really try to understand where is production at here today, at least from rental housing production, home ownership production. How much progress have we made, and what are the tools of government, resources and otherwise, that we need to carry us into the future. So going into 23-25, we had produced, I think, somewhere above, 26,000 units of affordable housing. That was more than what was produced in the prior 5 months. But really part of building the budget is figuring out, just from a state perspective, what is the future that we need to push for from a housing perspective, from an economic development perspective? So we came out of the 23-25 budget with more money for rental production. I think if we look back, we probably produced somewhere around 4,000 units per year of housing. And so the work then and the work now remains on keeping a steady pace of progress. And that also means sort of changing the ways that we do business and re-examining beyond resources, how does government keep up with the need and pace of housing? And that means doing some internal re-examining of how we work from a state level.
Join the HFO community and get weekly multifamily intel. Click to subscribe.
So I know, the governor's big, it's 36,000 units built, which I'm sure, is a mandate that's come down to your department.
Yeah.
I think a lot of things we've seen is the balance between pushing for new construction and then what do we do with some of the older stock and the maintaining, especially in the affordable space.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you guys play a role in that stance of looking for, is all this much money going to allocated for new construction? Are we allocating more or less to existing to maintain? What's your thought on that?
Yeah. So as you know, it's actually been just the last 5 years or so that preservation has gotten more attention. It does not always tend to garner as much attention. It doesn't get the groundbreakings and the grand openings. But as you know, for people that are living in housing that is affordable, it is not affordable forever. And regardless of the income band, you need to make sure that those infrastructure, that those developments remain to be viable in community. So our focus is both on new production and taking good care of what we have. And so if anybody were to go to our website, one of the things that you would see for the first time is a preservation dashboard. Right. So we can actually look out for the next few years to see what is going to need attention and then what are we going to do about it.
And again, this wasn't on the radar 5 years ago.
That's right.
This was a totally new, kind of a new look, I think. And I think some of it has to do with a lot of the age of the properties.
That's
We're getting
right.
to that age where the mechanical systems need to be updated. They need big capital allotments. So
yep, that's right. And then when we see people that are continuing to struggle to pay rent, that then makes it really difficult. And so I think the conversation has been less about fault, but I think making sure that people, all of us from a community-based perspective, from a legislative perspective, understand how we get here. And I think part of that mechanics is when you invest in affordable housing, we need to make sure that we tend to that stock of affordable housing. And so both from the 23-25 session, from what we got in 2025 session, what people can continue to expect from us is a focus on production, building more across the state. But also this last session, we received more resources, not all of what we wanted, but still more resources for preservation, but also portfolio stabilization, particularly for projects that have struggled post-pandemic. So it is building and taking good care of what we have.
Which again is just another strain upon the state services to maintain and also build. So you're gonna have your work cut out for that one because there's a lot. We always joke around. Wasn't a lot built here in the 80s. Everything was built in the 70s and earlier, and then we had kind of the boom in the 90s, and it's the 70s stock, especially in the affordable space, that needs to be addressed. But as you said, it's not as pretty. There's no ribbon cutting. They're not doing.
That's right.
So it doesn't bring the pizzazz as you would typically.
That's right. It doesn't garner that much attention, but what is always not shocking, but I think reaffirming of why preservation is so important is if you talk to people and families that are calling those places home where there are neighbors, no matter where they're at in community, it is life-changing for those communities. And I think it's also just making sure from a core responsibility perspective, you need to make sure that the infrastructure is not only continuing to be an asset to the community, but things need to work for residents.
Right. Can't be continuing to deteriorate.
That's right. And so this is taking care of what we have. And I think part of that has also gone into the role and relationship when people think about building housing that is affordable, whether you consider yourself a houser or not. Oftentimes people think about it based on what their relationship is, meaning how does it look in my community? And that often garners an impression. And so we want to make sure we're taking good care of it, but also making sure that people understand you got to take good care of things regardless of the income of the people that call that place home. So
with that in mind, are the benchmarks kind of changed as to what you're measuring success moving forward with these kind of two components? Is that, I'm sure before there was preservation, it was all just, I don't say it was easy, but it was all numbers about new housing stock coming in. I mean, so how do you kind of measure these new benchmarks, and what would they be? Yeah,
so of course, so as you mentioned, the governor has put out a goal of 36,000 units of production. That's both affordable and market rate
housing. Which is a big number.
That's a really big number. It's a really big number. And I would say that formidably, from a state and from a national perspective, regardless of what you care about, whether it is health outcomes, affordable child care, the economy, innovation, in some way, all of those things come back to housing. And we have seen what happens when you don't center housing, when you don't make sure that some of the fundamental needs of your people are met. And so it is both laudable and I think appropriately so. As we think about the mechanics between that number, those goals, and the reality of getting there year over year, that is both a conversation and work around financing, meaning how do we finance things? Where does government get out of the way sometimes to make things more efficient? I don't think anybody thinks of state government and automatically thinks boy, you think efficient, and you've moved at light speed to do that. But I also think permitting and land use and some of the other kind of core functions that touch housing. And so year over year, I think now that we have a housing production dashboard, that is one of the ways that we want to make sure that the public can see where we are trying to go. And from a local regional perspective, we have regional housing production goals, and we want to make sure that it's easily available and accessible to people where we're going and what progress we are making or not making in each of those communities. And as I mentioned as I mentioned as well, post-COVID, what we saw is, and what we're continuing to see, is a unique dimension of portfolios that are continuing to struggle. And so in addition to preservation, there's sort of an extension that has grown into that, which is focusing on portfolio stabilizations, needs to make sure that those projects remain financially viable so that we don't lose them. And so I think when we think about housing production, it is both, yes, around new production, but making sure that there is a clear picture for preservation goals and making sure that people across the state, regardless of where you live, can track the progress to that and what we're doing about it.
And are there certain metro areas that are, exceeding or doing, better than what you thought they would do within the state? Or
Yeah. So I think when we think about the metro region, for example, what's been interesting about the metropolitan region is they've had the local bond measures that has really spurred a lot of development, a lot of housing development. That's a voter-approved measure, and those resources are nearly dried up or just about dried up, so those projects are getting moving. Some of those projects also relied upon state resources, and so we saw production from there, and so I think that's certainly a place of concrete area of progress. But part of the work is now, what are we going to do about it since those resources are drying up? And so we've got continued state resources to make sure that we can maintain production levels in that area. And so I think that's been really important. What's been really interesting to see, particularly in Clackamas, where you see sort of urban and rural areas, to see how you sort of need to not only measure success by way of volume, but what is built and the typology of housing that is built that I think often gets lost. But then I think when we take a broader view of our beloved state and think about places like Bonanza, Oregon, where it's a small town and rural community, where maybe the housing needs are not in the hundreds or even the thousands, they're in sort of the handful. They're in the handful, but it is life-changing in those particular communities. And so it's been interesting to see, as we have built more, to see what is being built, the types of projects that are being built. But I would say that, as I've mentioned before, from a state and from a federal level, the financing reform is going to continue to be really important. How we finance projects, how we continue to lean on the expertise of sort of the private sector. But I also think as well, a hard and necessary conversation around permitting and land use and some of the decisions that we make that challenge decisions that we've made maybe 10 or 20 years ago.
Do you guys get involved in the land use? I mean, do you do recommendations? Are you going to the local jurisdiction and talk about density reform and things like that?
Yeah. So our primary role in it is really in two dimensions. So the housing production dashboard that I mentioned, a big part of that, which is led by sort of the Department of Administrative Services that comes up with that formula. One of the things that that dashboard has allowed us to do is not only to measure production, but in partnership with, now that we've got a full pipeline of projects across the state for the first time that we can see, because we have a new funding process through the Oregon centralized application, we can also see what is stalling projects as well. And that has been really interesting to see. And so I think why that has been important, not only from a dashboard perspective or numbers perspective, but how does it influence the conversation? So meaning, if we're going to call it a housing crisis, if we're going to say that we have an affordability crisis, and we don't order our steps and our decisions in that way, we ought to be challenged by that and challenge each other, but also the people of Oregon should challenge us in that way. And so I think that will be, some of the work that's in front of us, is to really figure out where old and maybe outdated ways of doing business.
So being able to identify the roadblocks and different spots of where it's kind of holding back production.
That's right. I mean, think about your everyday life. I mean, which parts of your life do you fully rely on something from 20 or 30 years ago that are fully functioning today? Maybe they're clunking along, but I would imagine they could be using some sort of re-engineering and upgrade. And I think about our housing system in that way. So if it's a crisis, let's treat it like a crisis and bring some of that ingenuity and urgency that we did during the pandemic.
Right. Well, I know we're wrapping up. Is there any, like, a final message you'd want to share with industry and the Oregonians about why you're hopeful we can make a big dent in this, the housing or progress in housing in the state?
Yeah, so I think the first area of hopefulness is the whole reason why government exists is to serve the people of Oregon, and that is the primary issue on so many people's minds. And so our perspective is to make sure that we continue to move a course of action to that. We've updated our funding process to got rid of the old competitive notice of funding application process. Yeah, I know, talk about nifty and efficiency. Yes. So we now have the Oregon centralized application process, which means projects are getting to funding 8 to 9 months quicker. We don't have that sort of holdup between legislatively adopted budget and funding commitments, which used to be a year. They're now 60 days.
So it's a much quicker process.
It's a much quicker process. So whether we're talking about government efficiency or whether we're talking about how we move things quicker, I think government is not going to be the sole answer, but should be bringing things to the table to move things quicker and better for the people that we serve.
Well, great. Well, thank you for taking the time to do
Always.
this. Very enlightening. And we'll see you again next time on Multifamily Market Watch. Thank you.
Our entire office specializes in multifamily real estate, making HFO the largest multifamily brokerage in the Pacific Northwest. Your success is our passion. Build your legacy with HFO. Call 503-241-5541 or visit our website at hfore.com for more information. HFO is a member of Global Real Estate Advisors. Learn more at grea.com.
Love the insights? Tap the like button and click subscribe. It helps us bring more multifamily news straight to you.